You are listening Leading from the Front from the book India's Brave Hearts by Lieutenant General Satish Dua. To get the real essence of the story, do consider reading the book India's Brave Hearts by Lieutenant General Satish Dua. Enjoy the episode. Leading from the Front. It's the ultimate dream of an infantry officer to command his own battalion, which is the unit he is commissioned in, and get an opportunity to lead his men in war. When I was promoted to the rank of colonel, I became the commanding officer of my own unit, a Parambir Chakra battalion, with a rich history of honors and hours to its credit. It was a dream come true. A battalion has about 1,000 soldiers. 3 battalions makes a brigade, and 3 brigades are organized into a division. 3 divisions are grouped in a corps. In the army, a battalion is the basic unit. A unit or battalion is also colloquially called platoon. I took over the command of the battalion just as we were sent into a part of the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. This was a very hot area with lots of terrorist, cross-border firing and infiltration attempts. Within the first week, we had our first encounter with terrorists and I lost an officer. We received an intelligence report that 3 terrorists had taken shelter in a village house across the river, just a couple of kilometers from the battalion headquarters. Major Rohit Sharma, who received the report, was the only officer present at the base at that moment. He swung the quick reaction team into action, leading them himself, and asked for extra reinforcements to follow. The commando platoon called Ghatak deployed a few kilometers away was ordered to reach at the earliest the village where the terrorists were said to have taken shelter. Major Rohit Sharma was a very smart, capable and brave officer, a handsome 6-footer from Punjab. He was an athlete, a keen sportsman with a very pleasant personality. His troops loved him, his junior officers adored him, and I found him a very reliable member of the team. His team crept up to the house in which the terrorists were hiding and laid a cordon around it. They also occupied the neighboring 2-storied house, which was about 30 meters away. There were a terrorist field all around. After the cordon was in place, he personally led the assault team and sneaked up to the target house, using the fire and move tactic, where a few soldiers move at a time while the others keep the enemy engaged. The terrorists started lobbing grenades and firing at them with AK rifles. The assault team retaliated in kind and took up position behind a half-constructed mud wall and a tree. Some of our team took up the firing cum observation post in a house nearby, while others took position in the shelter of the next level of the terrorist field. This exchange of fire continued, with neither side managing a breakthrough. Rohit observed some movement in the window from where the terrorists were firing. He crawled forward and at grave risk to his life, looped a hand grenade through the window. The grenade seemed to have made its mark and loud cries were heard. Rohit's brave action proved to be a turning point in the fight. Eventually, after a prolonged exchange of firing, one terrorist tried to break through the cordon. Despite the dust and smoke, Rohit quickly intercepted him and fired at him at point-blank range. But during the close combat encounter, he was also hit at close range by the terrorist bullets. At the end of it, while all 3 terrorists were killed, Rohit too paid with his life. I was overcome with grief. I had arrived midway into the encounter and witnessed Rohit's death. The loss of a young major and a good friend in front of my eyes was a massive blow, professionally and personally. This was the first death I had to face as a commanding officer. There were many more to come later in my life, but that day I felt my world had come crashing down. How would I face Rohit's family? How would I face my unit, in which I had served and grown over the last 20 years? My own career was surely over. These were the thoughts that plagued me. I just could not sleep at night. I tossed and turned, my mind unstable to rest. Then the training and discipline of the army kicked in, and I started to think like a professionally trained army officer, like a commanding officer. As dawn broke, I came to the realization that Rohit's sacrifice had not been in vain. This brave officer had killed 3 terrorists. Not a single one had escaped. Isn't that a combat soldier's ultimate purpose in life? He was a hero. So many heroic deeds in the world were also tragedies. Lives had to be given up to accomplish great things. So the next morning, I gathered my soldiers and spoke to them. Yesterday, we lost a brave officer who took a bullet in his chest while leading from the front. But all the 3 terrorists were eliminated. His bravery also saved the lives of some of our soldiers. He is a hero. Recalling our past battles and victories, fires up the fighting spirit of soldiers and lifts their morale. All the more so after they have suffered the loss of a comrade. So I went on to remind them our battalion has had such a rich history of gallantry in all our operations since independence. Look at what we did in Siachen Glacier a decade ago. There too our first casualty was an officer. Remember how we covered ourselves in glory after that, executing the attack at the highest altitude in the world, capturing Bana Top, winning a Parambir Chakra, a Mahabir Chakra and a host of other awards. We are going to do that again. What is the best way to pay homage to Major Rohit Sharma? By ensuring that not a single terrorist remains in our area. Rohit's death so early in my time as commanding officer saved many of my decisions. I was determined that our battalion make its mark, and we went on to eliminate 106 terrorists during my 3 years as commanding officer of the battalion, which is a record of sort in Jammu and Kashmir till date. In our next encounter with terrorists, I did not wear a bulletproof jacket. I was acting braver than I felt. I also did not carry a weapon. When my team insisted, I told them that my job was to plan. If I had an AK rifle in my hand, I would be tempted to get drawn into firing. It would distract me from my main task of planning the operation and thinking ahead. My Subedar Major suggested that I carry at least a pistol for my personal security. I told him that I had full confidence in my QRT of 5 soldiers to protect me. Foolhardy though it might have been, my taking this risk really inspired everyone. My QRT too were spurred to be extra careful and alert. During the encounter, I saw a very different kind of energy in my soldiers and officers. There is just no substitute for leading from the front. Leading by setting an example is the key to leadership. During my training at the National Defence Academy, I had read a book called A Bridge Too Far by Colonel Ryan about the Battle of Arnhem in World War II. In the book, there was a British major who always carried a rolled up umbrella instead of a gun. There is a scene which depicts a German air raid in the movie based on the book. As the city gets sailed, people begin to rush to bomb shelters and trenches. A priest also hurries down the street to seek shelter. The major with an umbrella, as he had by then come to be known, sees him running and calmly opens his umbrella and says, "Come father, come under the umbrella," as if it were only raining. The scene left an indelible impression on me. Later in the book, the major explained why he always carried an umbrella. He said that the army contingents from different countries speaking different languages were fighting together at the Arnhem. There was often confusion about who was friend and who was foe, and the Germans never carried umbrella. This was a typically British habit. The major with his umbrella had become well known by then and saved the day for his unit several times when other Allied patrols recognized them as British because of the umbrella. A friend and I often used to discuss the major's attitude and were very impressed by it. Now, as a commanding officer in a combat situation, I started practicing my own version of the major's tactic. In those 3 years, I decided never to wear a bulletproof jacket or bulletproof patka. I used to wear a floppy hat made of camouflage uniform fabric. I also wore 2 more badges on my uniform, which were not common. One was a parachute badge, as I had done 5 basic parachute jumps voluntarily. The second was a badge with a commando dagger that all those who had been commando instructors were entitled to wear. The parachute badge was white and sky blue in color, and the commando badge was red. Both are worn on the front right shirt pocket according to the dress regulation. These brightly colored badges along with the floppy hat were so distinctive that all the officers and soldiers of my battalion could recognize their commanding officer from a kilometer or more away. It is possible to see that far on mountain slopes or across rivers and valleys in that area. Like the officer with the umbrella, these badges that I insisted on wearing saved my life and my QRTs too during an operation. On a dark moonless night, one of our ambush parties close to the line of control spotted a group of infiltrating terrorists. The ambush party consisted of only 4 soldiers, so it would not have been prudent for them to tackle the terrorists themselves. They alerted the company commander on the radio set, who ordered them to lie still, let the terrorists pass, and follow them stealthily from a distance till they come to a particular area in the narrow valley. The company commander would move there with a strong reinforcement to trap the terrorists in what is known in army parlance as the killing ground. It was important that the ambush party keep the infiltrating group in sight without giving them any clue that they were onto them. When Major Himanshu Sawant, the company commander, informed me of the plan, 2 more platoons were moved from the headquarters, 2 from another interception line. beyond the next ridge line, behind their position and the battalion headquarters, just in case the terrorists escaped from the encounter site. The small team that was tailing the terrorists held the key to the success of this operation. Shadow patrolling is one of the trickiest maneuvers for soldiers, to tail from a distance but not alert the target, especially on a dark night with very little visibility, is extremely hard. We were very hopeful of a successful operation and waited with bated breath, but alas, before they could reach the killing ground, there was an extreme heavy shower with thunder and lightning. Bad weather is the perfect time for terrorists to infiltrate, and despite our best efforts, we lost visual contact with them. We were disappointed, but we waited in the rain nonetheless. I had walked up with the 2 additional platoons that we had sent up from the battalion headquarters, each under an officer. We were all sopping wet. I took position under a tree with my QRT, but a tree only delays the effect of rain by a few minutes. Oh boy, did it pour that night. As day broke, I realized that waiting was futile, so I called off the operation and we walked back to the base. It took us over an hour and we were tired, wet and chilled to the bone, frustrated and disappointed. As I reached the base, I decided to debrief the different parties before we changed out of our wet uniforms. Major Himanshu Sawant's party would arrive a little later because they had a longer distance to cover. I decided that I would hear them out separately later. After we finished, I sent the others away to change and sat down on the lawn of the officers' mess for a cup of tea. My buddy brought me a spare pair of boots from my room. I decided to change out of my wet boots while waiting for Himanshu and the hot cup of tea. For those who have never experienced it, it is incredibly difficult to take off wet jungle boots. An operation in itself. The Adjutant Major Sean O'Brien was enjoying my plead and teasing me. During operation, soldiers drop all formalities. The sole of my feet were shriveled, having been soaked all night. I was enjoying the sensation of rubbing the soles of my feet on the grass before putting on dry boots. The tea soared up just then, and the steaming cup added to my feeling of well-being. Dry shoes, a hot cup of tea, the small pleasure of life. The joy was short-lived. I must have taken just a couple of sips when suddenly I heard a burst of automatic fire. It was more than one AK rifle. A soldier came running and shouted, "Major Himanshu's team has made contact with the terrorist in the Nala." Major Himanshu's party were on their way back to the base when an informant told them that the terrorists we were tailing last night had sought refuge in a watermill in the Mandi river bed, less than a kilometer from our base. I dispatched a few teams to cover all possible escape routes, hurriedly pulled on my dry boots and rushed out to meet my QRT. My uniform still half wet. Almost all of them were wet from the previous night's outing. But live combat spurs the spirits. Just then I realized that I had not sent any team across the river to cut off the terrorists in case they managed to cross it. There were 3 or 4 water channels in the riverbed, and in some stretches it was possible to make a crossing. So I decided that I would go across with my QRT. If we climbed to a little height, it would also enable me to get a bird's eye view of the whole operation from the other side of the river. We had to cross a 50-meter long rope suspension bridge to get to the other bank of the Mandi river. There was obviously no cover. The encounter had started in the watermill, which was on our other side of the water channel, so the bullets were flying close by. Normally, you walk slowly, one person at a time, on a suspension bridge because it swings with each step. We ran across the bridge one after the other to minimize exposure to bullets. As we ran, I thought it would be quite funny if one of us slipped and fell into the river. The risk of that happening was high, as was the risk of getting hit by a bullet. How much wetter could a wet man get? But my shoes would be wet again, I thought. Once we were safely across the river, we proceeded towards the watermill from the other side of the river. The firing intensified at the watermill. I could see 2 huts there. A couple of grenades were also looped by both sides. Suddenly we heard the wails of a woman over the noise of the water and the firing. We found a middle-aged woman who had been shot in the knees by a stray bullet. She was accompanied by her teenage daughter, who had tied a piece of her dupatta around her mother's knee to stop the bleeding. The lady was bleeding profusely and wailing loudly. We bandaged her wound with a dressing from our first aid kit, but her condition was bad. I tried to console her and told one of my boys to carry her so that we could get her to a hospital fast. We tried to message for help, but the radio batteries were dead. The spare battery also did not work as it was completely soaked. Another unexpected problem arose. The woman refused to be carried by a man. I shouted at her good-naturedly, "If you want to save yourself, stop feeling shy and let this boy carry you. You have already lost a lot of blood. He is like your son." Thereafter, our progress was slowed because of her. The good news was that the firing was petering out. The bad news was that we could not get in touch with anyone on the radio set. We had 2 sets but no live batteries. After some time, we could even see the movements of our soldiers across the river on the encounter site. All appeared well till suddenly a few shots were fired at us from behind from a height. We dashed and took cover in the hollows and rocks in the riverbed. The firing stopped. We could not spot any activity. After 5 minutes, we moved again cautiously. We had walked barely 15 meters when we were fired upon again. We took cover. One of my soldiers noticed some movements on top of the ridgeline some distance away. I remember that Major Deshpande's party was on the ridgeline in the south to cut off any fleeing terrorists. They were shooting at us, thinking we were escaping terrorists. We tried to call them on radio, hoping against hope that we might get through, but in vain. After 5 to 7 minutes, we again started moving carefully, creeping and crawling towards the roadhead. It was a funny situation. The encounter with the terrorists seemed to have ended. We had a civilian casualty on our hand, and our own troops were firing at us. We could not communicate with each other. What if Himanshu's party started firing at us from the other side to support the Deshpande's effort? Then we would be in a seriously dangerous situation. But thankfully they did not. Because as I learned later, they knew that they had killed all 3 terrorists. We had crawled only about 50 meters when we were fired upon again. One bullet landed very close to my foot and I thought I felt a small stone splinter on my face as it recoated off the rock. Maybe it was the splinter, maybe it was the wet clothes, maybe it was the lack of sleep, maybe the woman bleeding profusely who needed medical attention urgently. Or maybe it was all of these put together that made me do what I did next. I got up, stood erect, adjusted my floppy hat and took a few steps forward, saying to my QRT that our boys would recognize their CO. I walked slowly. There was no more firing. Major Manoj Deshpande later told me that they could make out their CO and his misshapen floppy camouflage hat, and a closer look with his binoculars showed him the parachute wing and commando badge. My QRT boys stood up and joined me, and we reached the road in a few minutes. We sent the wounded woman to the doctor and were happy to learn that all 3 terrorists had been eliminated and all our boys were safe and unhurt. That we came very close to being hit because of mistaken identity was something we all sat and talked about over and over again, and still do. My floppy hat and badges are always the punchline. Anything that saves a soldier's life becomes part of his folklore. This became mine.